Red and blue lights exploded across the quiet street, slicing through the golden hour like a warning. Diane Hartwell's hands found the steering wheel instinctively, positioning themselves at 10 and 2 where they could be seen. She'd done this before, too many times to count. Through her rearview mirror, she watched 2 officers emerge from the patrol car. Their silhouettes moved with practiced authority, flashlights already drawn. The lead officer approached her window, his beam cutting directly into her eyes. "Evening, ma'am." "License and registration." His tone wasn't a greeting, it was a command. Diane kept her voice steady. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I was pulled over?" "Expired tags." He tapped her rear window with the flashlight. "License and registration, now." She reached slowly for her purse, narrating each movement. "I'm reaching for my wallet in my bag on the passenger seat." Her fingers found the leather, pulled it toward her. Something in his posture had already shifted. Jaw tight, stance widened. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." Diane's pulse quickened. "For expired registration?" "Officer, step out of the vehicle now." His hand drifted toward his belt. His partner circled to the passenger side, silent, watchful. A porch light flicked on across the street. Diane's throat tightened. This was already going wrong. 8 hours earlier, Justice Diane Hartwell sat in her chambers, surrounded by the weight of precedent. Oak panels absorbed the afternoon light, filtering through tall windows. Her desk held 3 case files, each one a question of power and accountability. The case before her now involved qualified immunity, officers who'd used excessive force during a wellness check. The plaintiff's attorney argued the force was unreasonable. The defense claimed split-second decision-making. Diane's notes filled the margins in precise script. She'd been on the bench for 6 years, and cases like this never got easier. Her phone buzzed. Her daughter Maya's name appeared. "Mom, did you renew the car registration yet?" Diane glanced at her calendar, covered in oral argument dates. "I'll handle it this weekend, sweetheart, promise." Dad always did it in January. "It's March, Mom." A familiar ache settled in Diane's chest. Marcus had handled every detail. Oil changes, insurance renewals, the small mechanics of daily life. 2 years gone, and she still reached for him in these moments. "I know. They'll take care of it." After Maya hung up, Diane returned to the case file. Officer-involved incidents, credibility assessments, the delicate balance between safety and civil rights. She'd spent her career navigating these questions, building a reputation for fairness that transcended politics. Her mentor, Judge Carolyn Morris, had once told her, "They'll question your every word because of how you look." So make every word count, Diane had. She'd risen through skepticism and scrutiny, becoming only the second black woman on the state Supreme Court in the state's history. She closed the file at 6:30, gathered her coat and headed to the parking garage. The drive home took her through neighborhoods that shifted from urban density to suburban calm. She thought about dinner, about tomorrow's docket, about the registration sticker she kept forgetting. She didn't think about the patrol car 3 blocks behind her, didn't notice when it closed the distance. She was thinking about Marcus, about how he'd laugh at her procrastination, when the lights erupted behind her, and everything changed. Diane stepped out of her car, movements deliberate and visible. The lead officer, his nameplate read Brennan, positioned himself 3 feet back, hand still near his weapon. His partner, Mills, stood by the passenger door. Body cam light blinking red. "Is there a problem, Officer Brennan?" Diane kept her tone professional, courtroom calm. "Turn around. Hands behind your back, no explanation. Just commands. I'm complying with your request, but I'd like to understand why this is necessary for a registration violation." She turned slowly, facing her car. The metal felt cool under her palms. "Ma'am, you're being detained for obstruction." The word hit like a gavel. "Obstruction?" "I've answered every question and followed every instruction. You're arguing with me." "That's obstruction." Brennan moved closer. She could smell coffee on his breath, see the tension in his jaw. This wasn't procedure. This was pride. I'm not arguing. I'm exercising my right to ask questions. Her voice stayed level, but her heart hammered against her ribs. Across the street, a neighbor's door opened. A teenager raised a phone. Hands behind your back. Final warning. Brennan's fingers closed around her wrist, yanking it backward. The suddenness of it sent shock through her shoulder. Metal cuffs bit into her skin, clicking twice. Too tight. You're hurting me, Diane said quietly. Should have complied the first time. Brennan walked her toward the patrol car, one hand on her cuffed wrists, the other on her shoulder. Pushing, not guiding. The performance had an audience now. 4 neighbors on porches, 2 phones recording, and Officer Mills, whose camera captured every second. Diane caught her reflection in the patrol car window. A woman in an ivory blouse and slacks, salt and pepper hair in a neat bun, handcuffed like a criminal. For expired tags. The absurdity would be funny if it wasn't devastating. This is a mistake, she said as Brennan opened the rear door. Yeah? He pushed her head down, forcing her into the seat. You should have thought of that before you ran your mouth. The door slammed. Through the window, Diane watched neighbors whisper, watched phones capture her humiliation in high definition. She thought of tomorrow's headlines, of her courtroom, of every defendant who'd sat exactly where she was sitting now. Officer Mills climbed into the passenger seat, silent. Brennan started the engine. Neither looked back. In the darkness of the back seat, Diane closed her eyes and counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3. This wasn't over. The patrol car smelled of industrial cleaner and sweat. Diane sat rigid, wrists aching where the cuffs bit into bone. Outside, streetlights blurred past, each one a metronome counting the distance from her normal life. She'd sat in courtrooms for 23 years, first as an attorney, then as a judge. She'd watched defendants in cuffs, seen the shame in their shoulders, the way they tried to preserve dignity while the system processed them. She'd ruled on excessive force claims, read transcripts of traffic stops gone wrong, written opinions about the Fourth Amendment and reasonable suspicion. Now she was the case study. The cautionary tale. The black woman who forgot to renew her tags and paid for it in humiliation. Her father's voice surfaced in her mind, decades old but clear. Keep your head up, Diane. They want you to look down. Don't give them that. He'd been a janitor at the courthouse where she'd later serve as a judge. He'd cleaned the floors she'd walk as an attorney, emptied trash bins in chambers she'd one day occupy. He'd taught her that dignity wasn't given. It was claimed. She thought of her investiture ceremony, her father in the front row, tears streaming down his face when she took the oath. 6 months later, he was gone. Heart attack in his sleep, quick and quiet, like everything about him except his pride. What would he think of this? His daughter, Supreme Court Justice, cuffed in the back of a police cruiser for a registration sticker. The anger she'd kept contained began to simmer. Not the hot, explosive kind, the cold, calculated fury that fueled her best opinions, the kind that made her pen move across legal pads at 3 a.m., building arguments brick by brick until they were unassailable. Brennan's voice crackled over the radio, casual, almost bored. Transporting 1 female to booking. Expired tags, obstruction, 1 female. Not a person, not a citizen, just a category. A number. Diane opened her eyes and stared at the metal grate separating her from the front seat. Through it, she could see the back of Brennan's head, the casual way he drove, like this was nothing. Like she was nothing. She'd spent her career trying to fix a broken system. Tonight, she'd become evidence of how broken it remained. The precinct's fluorescent lights made everything look sickly and pale. Diane sat in a holding area, still cuffed, while Brennan processed paperwork at a desk 20 feet away. Other officers moved through the space, some glancing at her with curiosity, others with studied indifference. She'd been in stations like this before, but always on the other side. Always with authority. In her second year as a circuit judge, she'd visited this very precinct for a community policing forum. The chief had shaken her hand, called her Your Honor with genuine respect. She wondered if he was here tonight. Her path to the bench had been brutal and beautiful. Law school at Georgetown on a full scholarship, working nights at the campus library to send money home. Her mother had cleaned houses. Her father had worked double shifts. Neither had finished high school, but both had been unshakable in their belief that education was the way out. Her first clerkship had been with Judge Carolyn Morris, a legend in civil rights law. On Diane's first day, Judge Morris had pulled her aside. "You're going to be excellent, but they're going to test you in ways they don't test others. They'll question your reasoning, your temperament, your credentials. Stay calm, stay sharp. Let your work be so good they can't ignore it." They tested her. Opposing counsel, who spoke over her in court. Colleagues who assumed she was the court reporter, not the attorney. The partner who told her she was articulate for someone from her background. She'd endured it all with the composure her parents had modeled, building a reputation case by case. When she made judge at 41, she was the youngest on the circuit bench. When she was appointed to the state Supreme Court at 47, the confirmation hearing had been vicious. Senators questioned her impartiality, suggested her background made her biased against law enforcement. She'd sat through it, answered every question with precision, and been confirmed by a single vote. Since then, she'd written landmark opinions on search and seizure, qualified immunity, and use of force. She'd ruled for officers when the law supported them, and against them when it didn't. She'd cultivated a reputation for fairness that even police unions grudgingly respected. And tonight, none of it had mattered. Not her title, not her temperament, not her decades of service. To Officer Brennan, she'd been just another black woman who needed to be put in her place. The irony was almost poetic. Tomorrow morning she was scheduled to hear oral arguments in Patterson v. City Police Department, a case involving a wrongful arrest during a traffic stop. The plaintiff's attorney would argue that officers had escalated unnecessarily. The defense would claim officer safety justified the response. Diane had read the briefs 3 times. Now she'd lived one. A door opened. A sergeant walked in, his face weathered and familiar. He glanced at the paperwork, then at Diane. His eyes widened. Everything was about to shift. Sergeant Marcus Kwame had 31 years on the force. He'd seen politicians arrested for DUIs, celebrities caught with contraband, and teenagers who thought badge numbers didn't matter. But he'd never seen this. He approached Brennan's desk, his voice carefully neutral. "What have we got?" Brennan didn't look up from his report. "Expired tags. She got mouthy, so I detained her for obstruction." Kwame glanced at Diane again. Something about her posture, straight back despite the cuffs, eyes forward, dignified even in humiliation, triggered recognition. He walked closer to the holding area. "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Diane Hartwell." Her voice was quiet but clear. The name landed like a brick. Kwame's jaw tightened. He turned to Brennan. "Did you run her license?" "Not yet. Processing the—" "Run it now." Brennan's fingers moved across the keyboard. The screen loaded. His face went white. Kwame kept his voice level, but his hand was shaking when he picked up Diane's purse from the evidence bag. "Your Honor, may I?" She nodded. He opened the wallet carefully, as if it might detonate. Inside, beneath her driver's license, was the ID card. State Supreme Court Justice Diane M. Hartwell. The state seal gleamed under the fluorescent lights. The room went silent. Officer Mills, who'd been reviewing his body cam footage, looked up sharply. 2 other officers stopped mid-conversation. Brennan stood frozen, report still in hand. Kwame placed the ID on the desk where everyone could see it. "You arrested a Supreme Court justice for expired tags." "She didn't identify herself," Brennan started. Diane's voice cut through, calm as a verdict. "I shouldn't have to." The words hung in the air, simple and devastating. Kwame moved to unlock her cuffs. his hands gentle, apologetic. The metal released with a soft click. Diane brought her wrists forward, red marks visible where the restraints had been too tight. "Your Honor, I'm profoundly sorry. This should never have—" She raised a hand, silencing him. "Don't apologize to me because of my title, Sergeant. Apologize because what Officer Brennan did was wrong. Would have been wrong if I were a teacher, a nurse, a cashier, anyone." Brennan found his voice. "You were being non-compliant. I asked questions. That's not obstruction, officer. You escalated because you could. Because you assumed I'd just comply, just accept whatever you decided, no matter how unnecessary or humiliating." She stood slowly, rubbing her wrists. "You assumed wrong." Mills stepped forward, his voice uncertain. "Your Honor, the body cam footage is public record now, yes." Diane reached for her purse, checking for her phone, her keys, her ID. Everything was there except her dignity. That would take longer to recover. Kwame offered to escort her personally, to make sure she got home safely, to handle this quietly. His eyes pleaded, "Let this go away, for everyone's sake." Diane looked at him, a good man probably, caught in a system that protected its own. She thought of the case waiting on her desk, the oral arguments scheduled for morning, and every traffic stop that ended exactly like this for people without titles to shield them. This doesn't go away quietly. "Sergeant." The precinct door opened behind her. Through it she could see the parking lot, her car waiting, and beyond that, the long road home. She walked toward it, each step measured. As Officer Brennan watched from the desk, his career suddenly as uncertain as the night had become. The parking lot air felt sharp against Diane's skin, crisp with the promise of complications. Kwame walked beside her, his keys jingling nervously. Behind them, the precinct windows glowed like a stage set, officers visible through the glass huddled in urgent conversation. "Your Honor, if I could just—" Kwame stopped walking, forcing Diane to turn. "This doesn't have to become a thing." Officer Brennan made a judgment call. He thought a black woman questioning him needed to be controlled. Diane's voice stayed soft, but the edge was unmistakable. "You've been doing this long enough to know exactly what happened, Sergeant. Don't insult me by pretending otherwise." Kwame's shoulders sagged. "If this goes public, it'll destroy careers. There'll be investigations, media circuses. The union will fight. You'll be scrutinized. Every case you've ever ruled on involving police will be re-examined." "I know." Diane reached her car, ran her hand over the expired registration sticker that had started everything. Such a small thing, such enormous consequences, then why? Kwame's frustration broke through his professional mask. "You could walk away, file a complaint internally. We'd handle it. Brennan would get reprimanded, maybe suspended. But this could stay contained." For a moment, just a flicker, Diane considered it. The easy path, the quiet resolution. She could go home, renew her registration tomorrow, and pretend this was an anomaly, an unfortunate incident that didn't reflect larger truths. Then she thought of the teenager across the street, who'd filmed everything. The neighbors who'd watched her get cuffed on their quiet block, and more than that, the thousands of people who experienced exactly this, who got arrested for obstruction because they asked questions, who had no title to make officers freeze, no ID to transform humiliation into apology. "Because I'm tired, Sergeant?" She unlocked her car, the beep cutting through the night. "Tired of pretending the system works when we keep seeing evidence it doesn't. Tired of ruling on cases like this while telling myself things are getting better." Inside the precinct, Brennan appeared at the window. Even from this distance, Diane could see the fear in his posture. Good. Fear meant he understood consequences might finally arrive. A news van turned onto the street, satellite dish extended. Kwame cursed under his breath. Someone tipped them off already. Diane slid into her driver's seat, adjusted the mirror, and started the engine. Through the windshield, she watched the news crew unload equipment. saw a reporter checking her appearance in a compact mirror. The circus Kwame had warned about was assembling in real time. She should feel anxious, should be calculating political fallout and professional ramifications. Instead, she felt something unexpected, clarity. Cold, sharp, and uncompromising. Your Honor, Kwame leaned down to her window. Please, think about what you're about to do. Diane met his eyes. I have been thinking about it my entire career, Sergeant. Now I'm done thinking. She pulled out of the parking lot as the reporter rushed toward the precinct entrance, cameraman in tow. In her rearview mirror, the scene grew smaller. The lights, the building. Kwame standing alone in the parking lot like a man watching a storm approach. The drive home felt longer than usual. Every stoplight, every turn waited with decision. By the time she pulled into her driveway, her hands were shaking, but her mind was clear. Diane's home office smelled of old books and lemon oil. She'd built this sanctuary after Marcus died. Floor-to-ceiling shelves holding case reporters, legal treatises, and the collected opinions she'd written over 6 years on the bench. Her desk sat beneath a window overlooking the garden Marcus had planted, now overgrown but still beautiful. She sat in her leather chair at 2 a.m., sleepless and wired. On her desk, a legal pad, her Supreme Court Justice ID, and her phone, which had vibrated 37 times since she'd left the precinct. Messages from colleagues. Texts from her daughter, demanding to know if the rumors were true. 3 missed calls from the court's public information officer. And 1 email that changed everything. From the ACLU State Director, marked urgent. She opened it. The subject line read, "We need to talk." Her fingers moved across the legal pad, not writing a complaint or a statement, but something else entirely. A dissent. A reckoning. The opinion she'd been building in her mind since the cuffs clicked shut. Outside her window, headlights swept across her driveway. Diane didn't need to look to know. News vans had found her address. They'd be camped on her street by dawn, cameras ready to catch her leaving for court. Tomorrow's oral arguments in Patterson versus City Police Department. The irony was almost biblical. Her phone buzzed again. This time she answered, "Hello? Justice Hartwell. This is Tom Richardson with the police union. We need to discuss tonight's incident before you make any statements." She hung up. 3 seconds later, another call. The police chief. She let it go to voicemail. At 3 a.m. she finished writing. 4 pages of precise legal reasoning, explaining why Officer Brennan's actions violated her Fourth Amendment rights, why obstruction charges required actual obstruction, and why qualified immunity shouldn't protect officers who escalate traffic stops into arrests without cause. It was the opening brief in a case that didn't exist yet, but it would. She picked up her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and found the number for Martin Chen, the ACLU attorney who'd argued brilliantly before her bench last year. She typed a text. "Are you still taking civil rights cases?" The response came within seconds, always. "What happened?" Diane's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Once she sent this, there was no quiet resolution. No internal complaint that disappeared into departmental review. This would be public, brutal and permanent. She thought of Brennan's hand on her wrist, the pressure of cuffs, the casual cruelty of being treated like a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be respected. She thought of everyone who'd experienced worse, who'd been hurt, traumatized, or killed in traffic stops that began exactly like hers. She typed, "I was arrested tonight during a traffic stop. Expired tags became obstruction. I need to file suit. Not for me, for everyone who can't." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "I'm calling you now." By 4 a.m. they'd sketched the framework. Civil rights violation, excessive force, false arrest. The case would be explosive. Supreme Court Justice sues police department. Media would devour it. The police union would fight like hell. Her colleagues on the bench would be forced to comment. And somewhere in all of it, Maybe, just maybe, something would change. At 5 a.m., her phone lit up with a news alert. Breaking: Supreme Court Justice allegedly arrested during traffic stop. Body cam footage leaked. The video was already online. 47 seconds of her being ordered from her car. Her calm questions. Brennan's escalation, the cuffs. The teenager across the street had uploaded it. Within hours it would have millions of views. Diane watched herself on the small screen, the humiliation captured in high definition, now public forever. She should feel exposed, vulnerable. Instead, she felt something else, ready. The sun rose over her garden, golden light touching the wildflowers Marcus had loved. Diane showered, dressed in her darkest suit, deep burgundy, the color of authority, and prepared to face her courtroom. But first, she had to walk through the gauntlet of cameras waiting on her lawn. She checked her reflection one final time, straightened her collar and opened her front door. The shouted questions hit like a wave. Justice Hartwell, will you file charges? Do you think this was racial profiling? Should Officer Brennan be fired? She descended her porch steps, her expression neutral, her stride purposeful. At the end of her driveway, she stopped, turned to face the cameras. Let them capture her face in morning light. I'll have a statement later today. Right now I have a court to run. Her voice carried over the chaos, judge firm and unshakable, and a case to hear about police accountability. The timing, as they say, is interesting. She got in her car and drove toward the courthouse, the same route she'd taken yesterday. But everything had changed. By the time she pulled into her reserved parking space, her phone showed 53 new messages. The last one was from Officer Brennan's attorney. We need to settle this before it destroys everyone involved. Diane deleted it, stepped out of her car, walked toward the marble steps of the state Supreme Court, where justice was supposed to live. Behind her, the storm she'd unleashed was just beginning. The Supreme Court building felt different that morning. Diane walked through security, officers who'd greeted her warmly for 6 years now avoiding eye contact. The metal detector beeped. Standard procedure. But today, the young officer's hands shook as he waved her through. In the judge's corridor, silence replaced the usual collegial chatter. Justice Hammond passed her without speaking. Justice Rivera offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Through the walls, Diane heard urgent whispers, footsteps that paused outside her chambers, then hurried away. Her law clerks waited inside, faces worried. Sarah, her senior clerk, spoke first. Your Honor, the Chief Justice wants to see you before oral arguments. Of course he did. Diane set down her briefcase, noting how her hands trembled slightly. Tell him I'll be there in 10 minutes. Alone in her chambers, surrounded by her books and her achievements, Diane felt the weight settle. The body cam footage had been viewed 4 million times overnight. Twitter was ablaze with darn justice for justice. The police union had issued a statement calling the arrest appropriate and by the book. Conservative media was questioning whether she could remain impartial in police cases. Liberal outlets were demanding Brennan's badge, and in the middle of it all, her, exposed, vulnerable. No longer the neutral arbiter, but the subject of debate. Her father's watch sat in her desk drawer, the one she'd inherited after he died. She pulled it out, held the cool metal in her palm. He'd worn it every day for 40 years, janitor's wages buying this one luxury. On the back, an inscription. Time always tells the truth. She thought of him mopping floors in this very building, wondered what he'd say about his daughter becoming the story instead of writing the story. Would he be proud of her refusal to stay quiet? Or would he worry, the way he always worried, about the cost of standing up? Her phone buzzed. A text from Maya. Mom, they're calling you an activist judge now. They're saying you can't be fair. Are you okay? Diane's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Was she okay? She'd been arrested, humiliated, and turned into a political lightning rod overnight. Her integrity was being questioned. Her career potentially compromised. The case she'd planned to hear today, Patterson versus City Police, would now be scrutinized as biased no matter how she ruled. She typed back, "I'm exactly where I need to be." But sitting in her chambers, watching the morning light filter through windows her father once cleaned, she'd never felt more alone. Martin Chen arrived at her chambers at 9 a.m., carrying a briefcase and the kind of focused intensity that made him legendary in civil rights litigation. He'd argued before Diane's court twice, won once, and earned her respect both times. "Your Honor," he started. "Diane. If we're doing this, it's Diane." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. Martin sat, pulled out a tablet showing the viral footage. 4.7 million views now. The narrative is solidifying. Supreme Court Justice gets the same treatment as everyone else. Proves system is broken. But we need to be strategic. Strategic how? Diane leaned forward. The police union is already framing this as you using your position to attack law enforcement. They're digging into every case you've ruled on, looking for patterns. If we file suit, they'll claim you're biased, that this is personal vendetta. He swiped through screenshots of news coverage, social media posts, union statements. "It is personal," Diane said quietly. "It happened to me. How could it not be personal? Fair, but here's what they don't know yet." Martin pulled up a document. "I've been tracking Officer Brennan's history. 17 complaints in 8 years, 12 involving traffic stops, 9 involving black motorists. Not one sustained by internal affairs. The numbers hung between them like evidence tags." Diane's legal mind shifted into gear, seeing the pattern, the precedent, the case building itself. He has a history. He's a walking Fourth Amendment violation waiting to be documented. And you're not his first victim. You're just the first one who can't be ignored. Martin leaned back. "We file a pattern and practice claim. Not just your arrest, but the system that protected him through 16 previous complaints." Diane thought of Section 6 of the Civil Rights Act, the legal framework for challenging systemic police misconduct. She'd ruled on these cases, always carefully, always weighing officer safety against civil liberties. Now she'd be the plaintiff, the face of that balance tipping wrong. What about Patterson? She gestured toward the case file on her desk. "Oral arguments start in 90 minutes. Similar facts to what happened to me. If I hear it, they'll scream bias. If I recuse, they'll say I'm admitting I can't be impartial." "You hear it," Martin said without hesitation. "You show that despite what happened, you can still evaluate the law fairly. That's more powerful than any recusal." A knock at the door. Sarah entered, her face pale. "Your Honor, the Chief Justice is asking again. He seems insistent." Diane stood, smoothed her burgundy suit jacket. Chief Justice William Bradford was a moderate appointed by a Republican governor, careful and politically savvy. This conversation would be delicate. "Tell him I'm on my way." She turned to Martin. "Draft the complaint. I'll review it tonight." "You're sure about this?" Martin asked. "Once we file, there's no walking it back." Diane thought of the metal cuffs, the casual cruelty, the assumption that she should just comply and accept. She thought of the 17 complaints against Brennan, the 9 black motorists whose voices hadn't mattered enough. "I've never been more sure of anything." She walked toward the Chief Justice's chambers, her heels clicking against marble her father had once polished. Each step felt like choosing a side in a war she'd tried to avoid her entire career, but the war had come for her anyway. Now she was just choosing to fight back. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled. Journalists lining the back wall, cameras positioned for the historic moment. Diane entered through the side door, her black robe settling around her shoulders like armor. The other 8 justices were already seated, their faces studiously neutral. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Chief Justice Bradford had tried to convince her to recuse. Gently, then firmly, then with barely concealed frustration. "Diane, the optics are impossible. You can't hear a case about police misconduct 48 hours after being arrested yourself." She'd responded simply, "Watch me." Now, seated at the center of the bench, She surveyed the courtroom. To her left, the attorney for Michael Patterson, a black man arrested during a traffic stop for furtive movements. To her right, the city's attorney, looking nervous. And in the gallery, Officer Brennan himself called to testify in the public hearing portion. This was the moment the world was watching for. Would she be fair? Could she separate her experience from the law? "Counsel, you may proceed," Chief Justice Bradford announced. The plaintiff's attorney, a young black woman named Keisha Moore, approached the podium. "May it please the court. This case is about a pattern we can no longer ignore. Officer Brennan arrested my client for making eye contact, for appearing nervous, for the crime of existing while black in his own neighborhood." Diane listened, her face impassive, her mind tracking every argument. She'd read the briefs 3 times, knew the precedents by heart. Miranda, Terry, Graham, the cases that defined police power and its limits. The city's attorney stood. "Your Honors, officer safety requires split-second decisions. Officer Brennan followed protocol." "Which protocol?" Justice Rivera interrupted. "The one where traffic violations become arrests without probable cause." The courtroom stirred. This wasn't the usual decorous questioning. This was personal for everyone watching. Diane leaned forward. "Counselor, I have a question." Her voice cut through the tension. "You've cited Graham v. Connor regarding objective reasonableness, but the Fourth Amendment requires reasonableness from the perspective of a reasonable officer. Not a fearful one, not a biased one. What makes Officer Brennan's assessment reasonable here?" The city's attorney fumbled with his notes. "Your Honor, with respect, given recent events, perhaps this question would be better left unasked." Diane's tone sharpened. "Because I was arrested, I can no longer evaluate constitutional standards. Or is it because I experienced exactly what Mr. Patterson experienced? I finally understand what reasonable actually means." Silence. Absolute breathless silence. Justice Hammond spoke carefully. "Justice Hartwell, the court's impartiality is intact," Diane finished. "I can separate my experience from legal analysis. The question is whether this court can acknowledge that living under these laws gives perspective, not bias." She turned to the plaintiff's attorney. "Ms. Moore, you mentioned a pattern. Elaborate." Keisha pulled up a document on the projection screen. 16 complaints against Officer Brennan in 8 years, 9 involving black motorists, 12 escalating minor violations into arrests, not one sustained by internal affairs. The numbers appeared on the screen, the same numbers Martin had shown Diane that morning. The same pattern no one had wanted to see until it touched someone who couldn't be ignored. Officer Brennan shifted in his seat, his face reddening. "And what happened with Justice Hartwell?" Keisha continued. "Expired tags became obstruction. Questions became non-compliance. Dignity became dangerous. That's not reasonable, that's a pattern." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Brennan's attorney stood. "Objection! Justice Hartwell's case isn't before this court." "No," Diane said quietly. "But the principle is the question of when police power becomes police abuse, when safety becomes suppression, when compliance becomes submission." She paused, meeting Brennan's eyes across the courtroom. "The Fourth Amendment doesn't have an exception for black motorists who ask questions. Does it, Officer Brennan?" He stood slowly, voice tight. "No, Your Honor." "Then explain why 17 people felt they needed to file complaints. Explain why Mr. Patterson is here. Explain why I spent Thursday night in cuffs for expired registration." Brennan's jaw worked. His attorney whispered urgently, but Brennan waved him off. "I followed training. I assessed threats. I made judgment calls. Based on what?" Diane pressed. "Behavior? Or assumptions about who looks threatening?" The silence stretched. Brennan's face went from red to pale. He looked at his attorney, at the gallery, at anywhere but Diane. Finally, I don't know anymore." The admission hit like a gavel. In the gallery, reporters typed frantically. The other justices leaned forward. This wasn't just a case anymore, it was a confession. Chief Justice Bradford spoke gently. This court will take the matter under advisement. We'll issue an opinion within 30 days. He glanced at Diane. Justice Hartwell, I assume you'll be participating in deliberations. She met his eyes. I will. And I'll be writing the opinion, majority or dissent, depending on where this court stands. Then we're adjourned. The gavel struck. The courtroom exhaled, and Diane sat still in her chair, her heart pounding but her face composed, as the world watched her prove that justice could still mean something, even when it cost everything. 3 weeks later, the Supreme Court issued its opinion in Patterson v. City Police Department. 7-2. Diane wrote the majority. The opening paragraph became instant legal legend. The Fourth Amendment's promise of security in our persons means nothing if we must surrender dignity to claim it. When traffic stops become fishing expeditions, when questions become insubordination, when black skin becomes probable cause, the Constitution isn't being enforced. It's being violated. The opinion cited 17 precedents, analyzed qualified immunity standards, and systematically dismantled the defense that officer safety justified unlimited discretion. It ordered new training, mandated independent oversight, created consequences for officers with patterns of complaints, and in a footnote, just one carefully worded footnote, Diane acknowledged her own case. This court's analysis is informed by lived experience of constitutional violations. Such experience does not bias legal reasoning. It illuminates it. The decision rippled across the state, then the nation. Police departments revised policies. Training academies added modules on de-escalation. The state legislature passed the Hartwell Act, requiring external review of excessive force complaints. Officer Brennan resigned before he could be fired. His pension was intact, his record complicated. He'd never face criminal charges, but he'd never wear a badge again. Diane sat in her chambers the evening the opinion published, reading responses from attorneys, judges, and citizens across the country. Her phone buzzed constantly. Interview requests, speaking invitations, law schools wanting her to lecture on constitutional rights and lived experience. Maya called. "Mom, have you seen the news? They're calling you a hero." Diane smiled tiredly. "I'm not a hero, sweetheart. I'm just someone who got tired of accepting unacceptable things." "You changed the law, Mom." Actually changed it, had she? Or had she just written down what should have been obvious all along? That dignity matters, that questions aren't crimes, that power unchecked becomes abuse. Through her window, she could see the garden Marcus had planted. The wildflowers were blooming now, gold and lavender in the evening light. She thought of him, of her father, of everyone who'd fought their own quiet battles against systems that didn't see them. Her father's watch sat on her desk, still keeping time, still telling truth. She picked it up, felt its weight, and remembered his voice. "Keep your head up, Diane, always up." She had. Even in the back of that patrol car, even facing cameras and scrutiny, even when staying quiet would have been easier, she'd kept her head up and demanded better, not just for herself but for everyone who came after. The phone buzzed again. "Martin Chen, you did it." The system bent. Diane typed back, "The system broke. We just acknowledged it and started fixing it." That night, for the first time since the arrest, she slept soundly. The nightmares of handcuffs and humiliation faded, replaced by something quieter, the knowledge that speaking up had mattered, that justice, however delayed and imperfect, could still arrive. Outside her window, fireflies blinked in the darkness, small lights in the vast night. Each one mattered, each one visible, just like voices that refused to be silenced. 6 months after that traffic stop, Diane Hartwell stood at a podium in a packed law school auditorium. The invitation had been simple. "Come share your story," she'd almost declined. The story felt too raw, too personal. But then she remembered the emails, hundreds of them, from people who'd experienced similar violations, who'd stayed silent because silence felt safer. "I was arrested for expired tags," she began. "That's the simple version. The complicated version is that I was arrested for asking questions, for expecting dignity, for existing as someone who didn't match an officer's assumptions about compliance." The auditorium was silent, students and professors equally attentive. I had advantages that most don't: a title, resources, a platform, and still, for those hours in that patrol car, in that holding cell, none of it mattered. That's the system working as designed, and that design is broken. She paused, gathering the words she'd rehearsed but never felt adequate. What happened to me happens every day to people without judicial robes or Supreme Court IDs. The only difference is the world cared when it happened to me. That disparity, that's what we need to fix. Not just the traffic stops, but the calculus that decides whose dignity matters and whose can be sacrificed for officer convenience. In the front row, a young black woman raised her hand. Diane nodded. "Justice Hartwell, do you regret speaking out, given the cost to your career?" Diane considered. Her relationships with some colleagues had never recovered. Conservative groups had launched ethics complaints, all dismissed but exhausting. She'd received death threats, required security, lost the quiet anonymity she'd cherished. "I regret that speaking out was necessary," she said carefully. "I regret that the system is so broken that a Supreme Court justice getting arrested is what it took for people to listen. But do I regret using my voice?" She shook her head. "Never." Another student spoke up. "What do you want people to take from your story?" Diane thought of her father's watch, of Marcus's garden, of the 17 complaints against Brennan that no one had acted on. She thought of Michael Patterson, whose case had given her the platform to speak. She thought of every black motorist who'd been told to comply, stay quiet, accept injustice as procedure. "I want people to understand that justice isn't self-executing. The Constitution doesn't enforce itself. Rights mean nothing if we're too afraid or too tired to claim them." She leaned forward, her voice strengthening. "I want police officers to remember that the badge isn't a license to humiliate. I want internal affairs departments to take complaints seriously before they stack up 17 deep. And I want everyone who's ever been told just comply to know compliance and dignity can coexist. Should coexist. Must coexist." The room erupted in applause. Diane waited for it to fade, then spoke her final words, the ones she'd written in her chambers at 3 a.m., the ones that felt most true. "I was arrested for expired tags, but I was freed by refusing to accept that injustice is inevitable. That's the choice we all face. Accept what is or demand what should be. I spent my career trying to reform the system from within." She paused, meeting eyes across the auditorium. "Turns out, sometimes the system needs to be confronted from without, by voices it can't ignore, by people who refuse to stay silent, by truth that won't stay buried." She stepped back from the podium, the applause washing over her like absolution. In her pocket, her father's watch ticked steadily forward. Time telling truth, time demanding change, time proving that even broken systems can bend toward justice if enough voices insist. Diane Hartwell walked off that stage not as a victim, not as a hero, but as a witness who'd chosen to speak. And in the speaking, she'd reminded everyone listening, dignity isn't negotiable, rights aren't optional, and justice, however delayed, must eventually answer when called by name. The traffic stop had lasted 17 minutes. The reckoning would last forever.